Good afternoon. The time is 5:38 on Wednesday, November the 14th, and this public meeting of the District of Columbia State Board of Education is now called to order. The roll will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Mr. Haywood, please call the roll.
Ms. Williams.
Here.
Mr. Jacobson. Mr. Jacobson. Ms. McClay. Ms. McClay. Ms. Wilson Phelan.
Present.
Ms. Wattenberg. Ms. Wattenberg.
Present.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones. Mr. Weedon.
Present.
Mr. Batchelor.
Present.
Ms. Alicia. Ms. Alicia. Ms. Robinson. Ms. Robinson. Madam President, you have quorum.
A quorum has been determined, and the State Board of Education will now proceed with the business portion of the meeting. Members, we have a draft agenda before us. Are there any corrections or additions? Okay, seeing no changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion has been approved. Members, we have the minutes of our November 7th working session before us. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? Seeing no changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Motion?
Second.
All in favor? All opposed? The motion is approved. Good evening. My name is Karen Williams, Ward 7 Representative and President of the State Board of Education. On behalf of the members of the District of Columbia State Board of Education, I want to welcome our guests and our viewing public to our Wednesday, November 14th public meeting. The State Board typically holds its regularly scheduled meetings on the third Wednesday of every month here in the Old Council Chambers at 441 4th Street Northwest. In addition to broadcasting this meeting live by way of the District Knowledge Network, we are also live streaming by way of Periscope on Twitter, and the video for the hearing will be posted on our YouTube page once the meeting concludes. Tonight's agenda includes the presentation of 2 annual reports from offices under the State Board of Education, the Office of the Student Advocate and the Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education. The Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education has continued to provide direct services to students and families that are very much in need of assistance. Since the Ombudsman's office was moved to the State Board, it has established strong connections to the community with schools across the district. The office is rightfully known as neutral but passionate, balancing with their skills their commitment to put the best interests of students first. The Office of the Student Advocate has also continued this dynamic outreach in the district that has had a marked positive impact on many, many families. The parent education, one-on-one coaching, resource supports, and trainings provided by the Student Advocate's Office help students, parents, and families in their self-advocacy. We look forward to hearing from the staff of the Ombudsman and Student Advocate's offices tonight. Before we begin public testimony, I want to call the public's attention to our upcoming forum on teacher and principal retention being held on November 28th from 6 to 8 p.m. at Walker Jones Education Campus. This will be a solution-oriented evening bringing together students, teachers, principals, policymakers, and the broader community to share ideas. The majority of the evening will be dedicated not to policy presentations, but to your conversations and ideas on how we can make progress with teacher retention issues. Join us and invite interested friends for a great discussion and a kickoff to a larger effort to retain our teachers in order to better serve all DC students. Please check our Twitter account and website for registration information. The state superintendent is unable to join us tonight, so we will move directly to the comments from the public. The state board welcomes public participation in activities under our authority. At every public meeting, we begin with testimony from public witnesses on education-related matters. Your comments will become part of our official record. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak at future meetings, please contact our staff by email at sboe@dc.gov or by calling 202-741-0888. Tonight, we have one public witness, Selvyn Banner. Please come down to the table. See, or she. Yeah, you can.
Please. Welcome, Mr. Banner. Our microphone issue is, our microphones are having slight issues today, so we're going to be using a handheld mic in front of you. Please speak into the mic. You will not hear it very well in the room, but we will hear it through the TV broadcast that's going on. So please make sure you use the microphone that's on your right.
Yes, sir.
Pick up the mic. Turn it over.
I got me through. I need help.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon, members of the State Board. My name is Selvyn Banner. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., attended Phelps Vocational High School, attended Oberlin College, graduate degree from George Washington University, and I was enrolled in a postgraduate program at Catholic University. My comment today concerns descendants of African slaves born in America. Imagery is everything. It was everything to me when I was growing up in the 50s and the 60s. At one moment, I saw Lewis and Albert Costello. Next moment, I saw Amos and Andy. One moment, I saw Johnny Unitas and Milt Plum. Next moment, I saw Jim Brown and Willie Mays. Imagery is everything. Those black children who are in Ward 7 and 8, well, I'm advocating that the board considers establishing a high school hall of fame. Washington, D.C. has had a plethora of athletes as well as scholars come through during the time that I was growing up. I remember Maury Wells having stopped off at 10th and R Playground. So one of the first playgrounds to have all lights at night and night baseball in the later 50s, early 60s. And he stopped off, took his time, parked his car on the side of the road, and came over and gave us a little pep talk on fielding and running bases. Didn't last about 7 minutes, but you don't know how that meant to us. You see someone who went to high school here in the District of Columbia and to take time to give us his attention. Many individuals came through DC public schools, for example, that I would include, and not to exclude anybody that I don't mention here, in the High School Hall of Fame. Monique Curry, who went on to play at Duke University, went to elementary school with my daughter. Now she plays for the Mystics as a professional ball player. Young lady by the name of Baraka Shabazz. She was a chess player. And she played, at one time had 20 opponents that she played at one time. I think she won 7 or 8 games, lost 7, and tied 5. I think that's where the story goes. Guys I went to high school with, like Ronald Hall. I remember back in 1964 when Bell played Phelps, the school that I attended, Phelps. The late Maury Povich wrote an article on the 2 schools, and he highlighted Ronald Hall. He said that he was the only back to have gained 2,000 yards in a season. Back then, we had 7 teams in the East, 7 teams in the West. Each school played each other once. You do the math, okay? Matter of fact, Joe Paterno from Penn State wanted to take Ronald Hall out of high school and send him to prep school in Pennsylvania in his 11th grade year. Unfortunately, his father died. He dropped out of school, went into the service, and what would have been his senior year in high school, the coaches in the District of Columbia at that time voted him all East, and he did not play one down of high school football. There was some other, Skylar Bird, who went to Banneker High School, scored a perfect score in the SAT, 1,600. Wow, man, I mean, there's a lot of, Dave Bean, Elgin Rabbit.
If you could wrap it up, we would appreciate.
Okay,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry. But anyway, that's what I'm here for. There are a lot of schools that are empty now, like Meyer, Fort Lincoln, the Old Shore Junior High School. That would be a perfect place to establish a high school hall of fame, and the students could run it. It would be a part of the tourism program that is already established in 1 or 2 of the DC public schools. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Laura?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to thank you. That's a great idea.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Jeff? Dr. Weedon?
Again, I'll echo that. The DC State Athletic Association does have a Hall of Fame, but I think there could be a lot done to make it more higher profile, incorporate student learning, museum exhibit type events. So I'm happy to talk offline, talk about how you can connect with them and work with them or through DCPS or the Public Charter Board around those types of issues.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
The Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education is currently led by interim Ombudsman Faith Gibson Hubbard. The office has 3 additional staff members: Burl Troth Durman, Assistant Ombudsman, Varel Fitzpatrick, Assistant Ombudsman, and Khadijah Williams, Legislative Affairs Specialist. I apologize, I'm really having a bad time tonight, okay. I would like to invite the staff of the office to come to the table to present to the board. Please come forward, your report. Yeah, you have to share, unfortunately.
Okay, so thank you so much for having us this evening in order to present to you the annual report for the Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education for school year 2017-18. I am actually not going to give the report at all. The staff is, but what I wanted to just state on the record first is just really how proud I am of the hard work that they've done during this interim time. Joanna Smith was a phenomenal ombudsman, and her presence is definitely missed, but I will say that her leadership is still very evident in the work that they are doing today. And so I just wanted to take a second and say thank you so much for your hard work. This annual report was made possible because they really rose to the occasion. And so I thought it would be most appropriate to have the Ombudsman staff who will be here because I am very interim, and they will continue on with the work with whoever the new Ombudsman is. So I will hand it over to them.
Good evening, board members. Can you hear me fine? Okay. Good evening, board members. I'm Ravel D. Fitzpatrick, the Assistant Ombudsman for Public Education, and I'm joined here by Beryl Troth German, the other Assistant Ombudsman, and Khadijah Williams, the Legislative Affairs Specialist. We are excited to present the Office of the Ombudsman's annual report for school year 17-18. In this report, we highlight the office's impact over last year. We show an analysis of the data collected and review the last 5 years. This year's report is slightly different from our past reports because this year we not only share our data and analysis with recommendations, but we also share the 5-year overview of the office since the 2014 reestablishment. We will begin by giving a brief overview of our role as the Ombudsman Office and how that role fits into the larger scope of serving families and schools in the district. We will then present the data from school year 17-18 and highlight trends promoted by that data. Lastly, we will show a snapshot of the office over the last 5 years to include major accomplishments, and we will conclude by sharing some areas in which we are currently working. We have found that many families and even some schools in the district, there you go, we get caught up on the word ombudsman. So we always make it our duty to include some brief explanation about what an ombudsman is. The word ombudsman is derived from the Swedish word meaning an entrusted person or grievance representative. The DC office of the Ombudsman is an impartial, independent, and neutral office that uses mediation and conflict resolution to resolve complaints and concerns for parents and families regarding public education in the District of Columbia. This office uses an activist ombudsman approach. We believe it is our responsibility to speak out against the systemic inequities that hurt our city's children. We are problem solvers and partners in resolving school issues. Our roles are to provide conflict resolution, offer technical support, and provide systemic recommendations. This is the DC Dispute Resolution Continuum, which is based on the Cadre Continuum framework. This shows where our office has impact in the larger dispute resolution process. As you can see, we work in the prevention of disputes by offering our systemic recommendations. We perform a significant portion of our work in the disagreement and conflict areas, and this is where we provide our direct casework and we mediate between families and schools to resolve problems and to restore relationships. We also work to create systemic impact by using the data we collect from the disagreement and conflict stages to develop recommendations and to advocate for change. As we work within these different phases of the continuum, we have developed a standardized process to address the needs of parents and schools. As seen here, our process involves an intake, a consultation, intervention, and referral. At any point in these steps, a resolution can be reached. We then use that data from that process to develop and share systemic recommendations, to refine our office's processes, and to share insights to provide technical support. By navigating through this process, we're able to meet our core values, ensure access, address issues, amplify student and family voice, and to reduce system inequities. Now that we've laid a foundation of of what our office does, we will now move to the annual or the data from school year 17-18. In this presentation, we will pull out high-level data and trends. A more comprehensive view of our data can be found on pages 4 through 15 of the annual report. Beryl Troth-German will present the data from this past school year.
Good evening. I'm Beryl Troth-German, and I'm the other Assistant Ombudsman with the Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education. Last year, we received a total of 941 contacts to our office. This is the highest number of contacts that we have ever received. 50% of these contacts were accepted as cases, while 30% of the calls were ones that we could refer out quickly without providing any additional assistance. 20% of these calls were issues that we were able to resolve with the callers at the time of call. These calls usually involved a variety of issues. Next. Each year, we have increased the number of contacts that our office has received, and last year, as we've said, was the most contacts that we've received since our reestablishment. The increase in the number of contacts suggests that we have been successful in our outreach and advertising efforts, and that families trust that when they call the Office of the Ombudsman, they will get help in some fashion. Out of those 941 context, 472 were converted into cases. They came from all sectors of the public education landscape here in D.C. 65%, were from DCPS, while 33% of the cases came from public charter schools, and 1% came from non-public schools. When we conduct an intake, we categorize a case based on the primary topic area on which the issue or problem is based. Special education accounted for the greatest number of cases that we saw this past year. School environment also accounted for a large number of cases, almost a quarter of those that we handled. Other categories that saw a large number of cases were access and discipline. As we have conversations about school choice and equity throughout the district, it is important to record where students live who are experiencing problems. About half of our cases involved students who live in either Ward 7 or 8. Ward 8, in fact, has the most cases by far. Ward 5 is the third largest contributor of cases. It is interesting to compare Wards 5, 7, and 8, which account together for 67% of our total cases, to Wards 2 and 3, which account for only about 3% of the cases that we have handled. As we dive deeper into the categories, we see that in each category, Ward 8 accounts for a third of the cases. In the case of special education, Wards 5, 7, and 8 together account for almost 2/3 of the cases that we saw. We also looked at different factors that contributed to all of the cases. For special education, in particular, these contributing factors, as we call them, are different aspects of educational experience that play a role in the issue that families are experiencing, but that were not the central issue or problem. As such, cases may have several contributing factors. For special education, 19% of the cases involved a service dispute, and 18% involved either an evaluation dispute or some other difficulty around identifying the student's disability. The majority of the special education cases that our office handled involved a student in elementary school. High school accounted for 22% of special education cases, and middle school accounted for an even fifth, 20%. 15? Here we have reiterated the magnitude of the cases that consistently come from Wards 5, 7, and 8 by ranking the wards from greatest to least number of cases involving special education. As you can see, Ward 8 has almost double the number of special education cases as Ward 7, which has the second highest number. Compare this to Ward 2, which only has 3 cases. One of the other categories that accounted for a large number of cases was school environment. Cases are placed in this category if they involve issues that are preventing a student from accessing education due to a safety, behavior, or environmental issues, as well as those where the actions of other students or staff members against the student or family signal a need for intervention or support from the school. 22% of our cases had an issue based on school environment. Again, of the cases involving school environment, students living in Ward 8 accounted for 35% of those cases. Wards 5, 7, and 8 together accounted for a combined 3/4, 74% of all school environment cases. 64% of our environment cases have issues relating to academic progress of the student in question. 48% of the cases saw issues regarding communication or relationship between school and families. 15% relate to bullying, 12% were about corporal punishment, and 10% of the cases involve contributing issues related to an unmet need that results in a student's inability to fully access their education. Over half of the school environment cases affect students enrolled in elementary school, while a quarter of cases involved middle school students and 12%, just 12%, involved high school students. Cases with access as a primary or secondary category are those that involve issues where a student is prevented from accessing their education for reasons unrelated to curricular or procedural difficulties. In the 2017-18 school year, this office handled 57 cases with access as a primary category and 22 where access was the secondary category. 41% of our access cases involved families experiencing challenges with enrollment into public or public charter schools in D.C. 14% of the cases with access involve issues with communication or relationship between families and schools. And 1/3 of the cases with access as a primary category involve students in high school. 28% came from students in middle school, while 185 were from students in elementary school. We utilized the data and trends from the last school year to develop our next steps as an office. Before we share those with you, Khadijah will highlight some of the accomplishments that we've made over the past 5 years.
Good evening. My name is Khadijah Williams, and I'm the Legislative Affairs Specialist for the Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education. I will give you a highlight of our first 5 years since reestablishment. Although much of this information has been highlighted in our June working session, the office feels that it is important to submit the accomplishments over the past 5-year term for the public record. As we continue to improve our processes and increase our impact, it is important to reflect on the accomplishments of the past as they lay the foundation for our success in the future. As such, here are some of our accomplishments over the past 5 years. So we've received over 3,000 contacts, directly supported more than 2,000 families, grew from staff of 1 to 4, experienced an increase in requests for data from local and national entities, as well as an increase in requests for technical assistance from LEAs, recognition as a national model by United States Ombudsman and International Ombudsman Associations, as well as peer education ombudsman offices, received invitations to speak locally and nationally, and developed a education ombudsman toolkit that is used by developing education ombudsman offices across the country. If you look at slide 20, you'll see some of the data for over the 5-year term. So 76% of our students were served for the totality of the 5 years, were African American. 34% of these families reside in Ward 8, while 21% reside in Ward 7. 10% of these came from Ward 6 in contrast. Over time, the office has increased the number of cases received from Ward 5, which now represents our 3rd largest source of cases. 22% of those cases involve school environment or safety, while 21% involve special education. And these are consistent with the individual years as well. And which is also consistent is that 65% of our cases came from DCPS and 31% from public charter schools. And so now Ravel will present our recommendations and current work to date.
Over time and through the refinement of our practice, we have come to understand the role that our office plays in shaping policies and practices. As we learn through practice, we have realized a need to increase our interactions with schools, LEAs, and education leaders in a more proactive way by providing technical assistance and opportunities for relationship building and professional development. So what does this mean moving forward? For the upcoming year and for the 10-year ahead, we look forward to exploring the following: partnering with local nonprofits to provide more technical support to schools and LEAs on the implementation of McKinney-Vento, convening stakeholder discussions on ways to address persistent achievement and opportunity gaps through coordination, collaboration, and/or policy and procedural changes to impact the educational outcomes of our DC students, exploring the feasibility of a citywide response to intervention framework, and strengthening relationships with families and LEAs to provide a wider impact to families and students. Thank you all for the opportunity to present our annual report. We welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. That was very enlightening. Any questions, comments? Marcus, I'm sorry.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you all for presenting and obviously for your work. Obviously, as the Ward 8 member, I really appreciate all the support you give to Ward 8 students and families all over the city. I had a couple questions in terms of, and I know you didn't have this in your report, but maybe you can enlighten me a little anecdotally. In terms of the sources of your cases, right? I know you guys do a lot of outreach and have gotten the word out about the office. Are most families coming to you because they say, hey, I found your number on the internet? Are they being referred by LEAs? I know I've referred folks to your office, but I'm just typically, how are folks learning about the Office of the Ombudsman?
So we receive, as you mentioned, referrals from a number of places. I would think anecdotally, of course, that the vast number of our cases come from people who either saw advertisements on the bus or they just looked up, on the internet. They had an internet search. We also receive a large number of cases, like you said, from board members and from council members. We do receive a percentage of cases from schools. And I would add that a percentage of our cases are not where schools refer parents to us, but where schools are calling us for technical assistance as well.
Got you. Thank you. And really quickly, in terms of access issues, the majority of them are enrollment. Are these usually just technical support issues associated with the lottery, or?
So it can vary. Some of them are just, sometimes it's a question of, is this actually my neighborhood school, and how do I get in there? But usually when they're calling us, even that question is due to a fact where, like, a family's gone up to a school that they thought was their school and then been told some piece of contradictory or confusing information for them. So even in the simplest cases, tends to be some sort of disconnect. It runs all the way to a number of the greatest number of cases where we get contacted by families who are experiencing homelessness tend to fit into this category and tend to be about enrollment issues, where more than just saying, I'm confused, or they're not providing me with the information, they're being flat out told, you can't enroll here, we don't have space for you. So it really runs the gamut from fairly simple to where students are actually being denied the right to enroll.
Got you. And my last question is about special education. A majority of your cases are associated with services disputes. Are these parents who are saying, my child has an IEP and we're not getting the services we need, or kind of anecdotally, again, kind of what do those cases look like typically?
I think you were really accurate there. So most of the time, if we have a family who says there's a service dispute, either they have an IEP that has certain things listed and the family doesn't believe that those services are being implemented, or they feel as if there needs to be a revision of the IEP and more services should be added.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam President.
This may be mostly to Khadijah, but I'm not sure. You all know a lot about discipline. That's a very substantial portion of the cases that you get. And then you were involved in some advocacy around creating the Fair Student Access Law and sort of the reforms to discipline in the city. So given what you know and given what you put into the advocacy and what you know about the law, what would you be concerned about? What would you want to have monitored as far as implementation goes to make sure that it's successful? Because it's a whole lot easier to pass a law than it is to actually implement the program in the way we all hope. So what would you want people to look at?
Two big pieces. One is the issue of compliance. It's clear that many of the schools aren't in full compliance with the law, and that's because the law is new. And so many LEAs may not even be aware that this is a policy. And then the second piece I'd say is important to pay attention to is the what the resources that we're providing to schools for them to implement positive behavior supports is one example, and just alternatives to suspension in general. The biggest issues we've seen in our casework is that often schools don't know how to support a child who has extreme behavioral needs. And it's great that we have this law on the books now, but now we need to really figure out what are the supports that are available to schools and where the gaps are. And that's something that we don't quite have the full information for yet, but this is definitely going in a positive direction. I think what we also need to do is we need to, in order to kind of have a sense of what the issue looks like, in order to know how to best help LEAs and how to help ensure compliance, is cross-checking the students who are disciplined with other data such as chronic truancy and other indicators, because then we can see what does the student population look like, and we know anecdotally from our cases what that looks like, and that data that we collect tends to align with what's seen in the city, but we need a more comprehensive picture of what that population is going through so that we can best provide resources, including behavioral interventions, et cetera.
And to your knowledge, is there any vehicle set up that's going to be looking at these issues and looking at what resources are needed, looking at which ones are successful, looking at whether schools have them, whether LEAs have them, the quality of them?
Not that I know of. I know that some charter LEAs have had conversations about this on
Conversation about how they will sort of monitor
discipline. Yes. So there, and those have not been really planned conversations. It was just charter leaders kind of coming together. I think that right now what is needed in order to really monitor that is someone who has, who has that big picture view, who can look at all the schools. And so that seems like something that OSSI and the state board could potentially collaborate on. I know that we didn't use school climate as one of the, as one of the indicators in the way that you and I discussed a couple of years prior. But I think where it would make the most sense to move forward is to talk to schools and figure out what are some of the gaps they have and what barriers are they currently experiencing with addressing these issues. To give a concrete example, there was one charter LEA parent who came to her office because her child had a significant a number of hours in his IEP. And the school that the child was formerly at really knew how to work with the child, and the child's been there for 2 to 3 years. But then when the child transferred, the IEP no longer worked. And so when we talked to the school, we found that the school told us that they didn't know how to calm the child down, and the only way they knew was to bring the parent in, and that frustrated the parent. And so they, in this instance, they were trying not to suspend the child. They would sometimes send the child home early, but they were really struggling with that piece. And so figuring out what kind of technical support that LEAs need, and I think that's part of that sort of like surveying process, I think will get us in a good direction.
Can I respond? So one, it seems like you guys might be on the front line of being able to collect some of the information that would be very useful. The other thing I just want to throw out, and Khadijah and I did once have this conversation, in Chicago is one of the cities that did try to reduce suspension through a policy several years ago, and they were very successful in lowering the rate of suspension. But over a series of years, a couple of things were determined. One, that in one case, the suspensions went way down, but in a number of schools, part of what was happening is positive practices weren't being used, and so kids were not being suspended, but they weren't being helped. They were in their classes, academic achievement went down, morale went down, teacher turnover went up, sort of everything bad went up and everything good went down. But nobody saw that because all they were looking at was the bottom line number. And then a few years later, and actually Chicago, they went in, they did a lot to work on that. I think they created a lot of solutions to that. But a few years later, they discovered, again, a lot of things look good on the numbers, but it turned out a lot of students were really being stuck in the in-school suspension. And even though they weren't out of school, they were still missing academic services. So just want us all to be very alert to how we're going to understand what's working and whether, because just the numbers don't tell us what's working. And I also think it might be one of the, a good project for the initial independent research collaborative that I hope is going to be established in the next few months. So.
Thank you all very much for coming today and spending some of your evening with us, and for the work that you put into both the presentation, your speeches, and of course all of the work that went into the day-to-day support for families. I didn't see any breakout by race in your presentation. I wondered if you could share that data.
So in this year's annual report for just the past year, we did not break out the data. However, if you look in our 5-year snapshot, that data remains true for each year individually as well as the collective. So about 75% of the students who we served were African American. And these, pardon?
And what about the other 25%?
Excuse me. Actually, I'm sorry, I have to look further at our data, but the next, anecdotally, of course, off the top of my head, the next set of students were people of Latinx origin or Hispanic people, and followed by Caucasian students, and then multiracial students.
Okay. I'm just asking because is there anyone in your office who's fluent in Spanish?
Although no one in our office is fluent in Spanish, we do utilize the interpretation line quite often.
I understand that as you probably all know, that's totally inadequate when you're managing a personal situation. I mean, I work with families who are fluent in Spanish and prefer to speak in Spanish, and it's such a challenge to provide services and engage families when we're only using the language line. I know it's an option of last resort, but I guess I would put on the record, as I'm outgoing in the ward where the largest number of Latinos live, or between us and Ward 4, that the services our city is providing to families who speak Spanish as a first language needs to continue to improve, and I'm hoping the next hire is fluent in Spanish.
So we just we hear all of that, and we also just want to add, though, that I think we have recently actually done a lot of better work in making sure that we have services available to people in their native language, including, actually, we have done several now in-person intakes with translators present, for multiple spoken languages for the comfort of families. And while it's not as good as having someone who's able to speak to you firsthand, I am proud of what we've now been able to add to make sure that we are adding additional services to people in their native language, face to face as well as over the phone.
Thank you.
I want to echo our thanks for the work that you do, and put in my plug for the feasibility of an RTI, response to intervention. It is a huge problem that students across the city are not having their needs dealt with proactively, and we need to have a broad conversation, not just about the model we're using, but the budgets to support the implementation of services. I also wanted to follow up on a question that my colleague from Ward 8 asked around residency. As you know, residency fraud has been a hot issue here in the district for the last year with the issues with Ellington. In your experience, is some of these issues around enrollment caused by lack of proper documentation, access to the materials that individuals and families need to use to prove residency? Do we need to further encourage the City Council to look at those documents that are codified in law, or is there something else the board should be doing around residency regs?
I think the majority of the situations that we deal with enrollment deal with essentially the entire process, and we've seen different breakdowns, if you would, at different steps. For instance, we've had a number of families who are unaware that after you are accepted into a school through My School DC, then you still have to fill out an enrollment packet. Then we have another group, if you would, of families who experience difficulties with putting forth the all of the documentation and the date of the documentation, the specificity with which that documentation. As an example, we had a case where a parent brought a bill which would normally satisfy, we would think would satisfy that, but because the bill had not been paid, then it didn't count. And when she brought the bill to be paid, it was too far dated from when she enrolled, and it was her first bill. And so that parent experienced difficulties simply because she did not pay the bill within that time because of the specificity. So I think you're absolutely accurate in that not just the process, but also the documents and the specificity which with those documents have to fall within.
So one data point that I would encourage the office to start collecting, if you're not, is around those documentation issues. What are people trying to use? Where are the holes in the system? So I think there's a lot of questions and concerns about, are the documents that we're using the right documents? Do they protect our families, give them access where they should have access, or are they burdensome? And I think understanding that issue would help us move the city in the right direction. So, thank you.
Any other questions? I would like to give you my sincere thanks for carrying on the work of the Office of the Ombudsman in such a wonderful way, and we look forward to continuing our partnership. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Office of the Student Advocate is led by a very familiar face. Chief Student Advocate Faith Gibson Hubbard. Her staff includes Dan Davis, Student Advocate, and Tiffany Wilson, Program Associate. I would like to invite them to join Faith at the dais.
Well, hello again.
Hello.
Welcome. So good evening, board members. As you already know, my name is Faith Gibson Hubbard, and I am honored to serve as the Chief Student Advocate for the District of Columbia, leading the work of the Office of the Student Advocate. Today, we publicly release our 2018 annual report, which details our work from school year 2017-18. Thank you for this opportunity to share our office's work for this past year and our current initiatives for this current school year. As you know, the Office of the Student Advocate provides guidance and resource supports to families to assist them in navigating our complex system of public education in the District of Columbia. In our day-to-day work, which I will detail more in a bit, we support students and families in their advocacy through parent education, one-on-one coaching, resource supports, and trainings. We do this work in order to equalize the balance of power between families and schools by increasing family voice, access, and power in our system of public education. So let me just stop and pause here before I go any further in this presentation, which will be very rich and enlightening, I hope. I want to stop here to thank my amazing staff who's already joined me at the table. I cannot fully express how deeply grateful I am to have such a phenomenal team. We have together been able to scale and deepen the work of our office in so many ways. Our reach into the community and the plethora of resources our office has developed, trainings we host, are only possible because of Dan Davis, my deputy, who is a student advocate, Tiffany Wilson, who's the program associate, and our 2017-18 fellows, Ravel Fitzpatrick, who you just heard from as assistant ombudsman, Jordan Triplett, and Renata Landro. It is truly an honor to work with each of them every day. So now, back to my script that I have here in front of me. For the past 3 years, our office has served as a centralized place to gain public education information and resources. However, we recognize that our office's position within the governance structure allows us to address day-to-day concerns of families and communities, provide systemic recommendations to align community and governmental goals. Before I highlight those few things in our recommendations, I would like to talk about the supports that we offer. So I'm now on slide 3. As you know, we offer our request for assistance line that we answer live Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. And I will show more about how many recalls we received last year in a few minutes. On slide 4, in addition to our RFA line, we also provide a wealth of information and resources online that are accessible to families 24 hours a day. These resources support families in better understanding the public education system, policies and procedures that impact them daily. I would also like to specifically highlight our Parent Go-To Guide, which has been a hot off-the-press sensation. We have 2,000 that we're putting into print now just because my school, DC, asked for them for EdFest, but also schools and other community organizations have been asking. It's really a parent's guide to understanding public education in the district. On slide 6, beyond our RFA line, we've also hosted a range of different workshops. Our bullying workshop, our parent leadership series, and our special education workshop, which has also been widely popular, and we've partnered with many of you in order to put that on. In addition to our trainings and events, I would also like to bring your attention to our other work, such as our Parent and Student Advisory Committee, which we have continued to tweak with in order to provide an outlet for parents and students to assist our office in better serving families throughout the District of Columbia. Over the last 3 years, our office has frequently mentioned the difficulties of families as they transition from LEA to LEA. And this year, in this year's report that you're reading, we also highlight the work we did around student discipline. And looking at prior to our recent legislation, looking at all the different student discipline policies. But I do see that continuing as we are continuing to have student discipline problems. So now moving on to our data on slide 7 for our annual report. We would be unable to develop resources and trainings or the host of office-led events without the information gleaned from our request for assistance line. So much of what I'll talk to you about now is the data coming from that. On slide 8 and also on 9, you'll see the 3-year comparison and the 3-year comparison for our request for assistance line. In school year 17-18, we reached over, through our outreach efforts, more than 3,000 individuals through our outreach and community engagement efforts. This is in addition to the calls that we take on our request for assistance line. There we were able to receive more than 600 calls and support over 400 callers in individual requests for assistance. This is a significant increase from our first year where we only had 135 calls total. And it was just me, so that was probably why. On slide 10, for school year 17-18, you can see the universe of calls, and you can see that we did receive 631. Some of those really came at after work hours, and so we've tried to make our voicemail very comprehensive that can serve parents in a way where even if they call, it's a bilingual message. It also provides people with direction to our website and the other online resources we have. We've noticed that some families have actually been calling at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and those are the times when they get home and they have those questions that sometimes are hard to answer during the day. So we're continuing to see how we can better support families in those after-hour times. On slide 11, you can see the RFA breakdown, request for assistance breakdown by race. In 2017-18 school year, we decided to add the race identity question to our RFA process. In years past, this had been optional, and we really had kind of been hesitant about doing it because we didn't want to keep people from getting quickly to the other resources we could provide to them. So it is still optional, and those who decline to identify their identity are not reflected within this particular data set. As we work to support equity, we need to assess how race affects public education issues and concerns. If we are to be honest and transparent about which families throughout the district need targeted supports and resources regarding public education, we have to consider race and identity, and so that's why we've moved towards that. On slide 12, over half of our RFAs came from students being served from DCPS. That, of course, is not a surprise. It is our largest LEA, and I have to say they've also been a very great partner for us. But we continue to support all students and families because we know that DC has more than 60 plus LEAs in the city, and all families need support. On slide 13, under resolutions, the majority of our resolutions involved connecting families to resources, both in-house developed and other ones that can be found through other organizations which we've partnered with as well. Along with those, with our resource guide and our other stakeholder engagement, our ability to provide information to families in real time has allowed us to ensure that families are informed as soon as possible. We've also coached families 23% of the time as they used information and resources provided to navigate DC education landscape. On slide 14, under our top RFA issue areas, two of the top issue areas for parents and families in school year 17-18 were, of course, I'm sure no surprise, special education and enrollment and access. Since our office opened in 2015, these issues continue to persist to be the top two. In school year 17-18, we also saw an increase in calls related to special education services. Parents reached out to our office looking for special education supports as it related to IEPs, 504 plans, the evaluation process, and available resources. And this is really why we've gone back to our Know Your Rights workshop, and it looks very different than how it looked in the beginning, but because people really need the information. On slide 15, you can see our RFAs by school ward, which I think is also really important. And we've also worked really hard to not only highlight that, of course, most of our calls through our RFA come from wards 5, 7, and 8, which I'm sure is a common theme, but also we have worked within our report to also show you not only student residents, but also ward of residents of the school and the correlations that are there. So on slide number 16, under our specific recommendations, our office is charged with recommending policy changes and strategies to improve the efficiency and equitable delivery of public education. And so each year we write this annual report and we offer some of the same recommendations that we hope someone will pick up, but now we've decided to pick up the mantle for some of those ourselves. And so you will also not be surprised that our recommendations start on slide 17 with special education. As we go through the school report card and everything else, we know that selecting a school is already tedious enough for families. When it comes to issues of special education, as I just heard last night at our special education workshop, families who have students with a disability have no idea what they're signing up for until they get to the school. We will continue to recommend that we need to do more, not only to have schools do what they are legally required to do, but families should also have comprehensive information. And what we give them now is not nearly enough. After school and out of school time provider programming should also be required to be listed, as we have had many families who reach out to us for those resources. And lastly, in this particular category, we've noticed that response to intervention processes are not implemented evenly or with fidelity across the district. And many of that and response to intervention is not just for students with disabilities, but really being able to fully assess the needs of students. And so it's really important for us to continue to think about how we can move that forward in partnership. On slide 18, under student discipline, For the third year in a row, we continue to recommend, in line with the statutory requirements, that schools should ensure that parents have physical copies of the LEA's discipline policy. Per law, these policies should be accessible online, and a lack of access to the policies is a barrier for students and families, ensuring that they are actually going to schools and understanding the policies that their children will be held to. And I say this because I had to look it up as a parent, but we also collect policies every year, and it's now a requirement of the law, and we have gone out there to try to pull policies, and we still cannot access them. Our office offers other recommendations as well on family engagement and partnership, student discipline, special education, mental health supports and resources, attendance, truancy, homelessness, etc. All of those are in our annual report on page 28 through 30. As we move forward into our fourth year of operation, I'm excited to watch our work continue to grow, and I'm eager to work in partnership to promote equitable outcomes for all district students and their families. This school year, in school year 18-19, we have already made improvements to our internal processes and data collection and resource development, and extended our reach into the community more in order to work with local partners to reach more families. On slide 19, you can see that we've improved our RFA process and our data collection. We've added grade level because while we've known grade bands for some time, we found it really important to know even more specific data in that area. In addition to our RFA line, we've already touched more than 900 people through our in-person meetings and community events, and we're just barely one quarter in. We just finished one quarter. On slide 20 and 21, we've revamped our Safe Passage toolkit, and I shared that with you guys. This is a space in which we're going to continue to work more as people have asked for us to. I know in Ward 6, some families had reached out, and things happen every day. And so it's really a comprehensive guide to help people know what's going on in the district and also other best practices throughout the country around safe passage. On slide 22, you can see the way that we have worked in partnership around student discipline. And so that really continues to be very important to us. And moving beyond just looking at each of the policies every year, we had the Every Student, Every Day Coalition, which is not to be confused with the Everyday Counts, but it is advocates from the community who work in public education in various capacities that have asked us to pull together a student discipline guide, helping families understand what the law says. We've done that, and we hope to release that at the end of November, and that was done in partnership with the Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education, as well as this particular coalition. So you can look forward to that. And our special education Know Your Rights discussion, which has continued to be really popular. Last night we just had one in Ward 5, and it went really well. I'm looking forward to partnering with both Karen Williams and Markus Batchelor on the ones that we will do east of the river. Slide 24, you'll see that we also are continuing our commitment around bullying and helping families to understand our very specific laws around bullying and ways in which they can access their rights to support their students. And we have done that in partnership with the DC Office of Human Rights Citywide Bullying Prevention Program. Last year, that was a successful workshop, and we look forward to continuing that. But we also have that as a podcast. On slide 25, this is something that's really new, but as we talk to schools and parents every day, the main undercurrent that we always hear are issues of race and equity. And so as we have really grappled as an office as to what we should do, we have decided that we would work on a toolkit around school-facing race, equity, and inclusion issues. And this toolkit is really kind of a starter kit for schools who are really trying to figure out what to do with those issues that they are confronted with, and connecting them to other resources and people who are doing this work throughout the district. We've also refreshed, so you can look forward to that. And lastly, we've refreshed our webpage in order to be more easy to navigate and highlight more of our resources. So As you can see, we've been very busy, and I'm very proud of the work that we've been able to do, and I look forward to the work that we will continue to do as an office and continue to do in partnership with each of you. And of course, before I close, I always want to remind anyone that's in this room or that is watching that they can reach out to our office via phone at 202-741-4692 or visit us online at studentadvocate.dc.gov. Thank you again for listening to my very lengthy testimony and for your continued support. I welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you, Faith. I don't know how you do it. But thank you. Any questions, comments? Mr. Batchelor?
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you all for the work that you do. I really just had a quick question around your race and equity resources. I know it says here in the description that it really is resources for schools to become more inclusive and become aware of some of the inequities and really how to address them in a comprehensive way in the school environment. Does this include work with educators around cultural competency and things like that?
So yes, and I don't want you to think that if a school picks up this particular guy that they will have everything fixed. That's not the intent. So yes, it does touch upon that, but I think it also has helpful questions as well as readings, resources that will be useful for schools to consider and other practitioners who are working in this space. Because I think as a school, it is hard for you to do that on your own. But sometimes you need to have a few conversations first before you even get started, full-fledged started. And so I think it does a good job at that.
The only thing I would just want to say is to acknowledge publicly how excellent the workshop was that you did on special education out in Ward 3. I guess it was last spring. It was terrifically attended. People are still talking to me about it, and we want you back. So.
We're happy to come back. There were 80 participants at that particular workshop, so it was phenomenal.
I want to follow up on the conversation about the race and equity work. I think it's fabulous and sorely needed across the city. There's another component to it that I'd love for your office to put some thought behind. Our schools are remarkably segregated. What are the policies and the policy changes that we need to implement as a city to start promoting building systems that are integrated so that this work has the ability to truly impact and change things? A great education shouldn't be based on a zip code, and we need to improve the diversity of our schools across the city. So it's just another element that I think builds upon the work, and I just wanted to flag it for you. I think your office coming up with recommendations, looking at lottery preferences for at-risk in non-Title I schools, looking at when we're looking at modernizations, what should capacity be so that we're not excluding populations that have traditionally attended a school community that are being pushed out because of gentrification. What are those types of things that we need to be looking at as a systems level, in addition to the on-the-ground work to really have these very hard conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely take on that challenge. I think it's definitely something to really think about. I just know that in practice, what I see happening, even sometimes the best laid plans, even around stopping segregation of schools, people's actions become something different. And I know that in my neighborhood, which is rather diverse, that diversity doesn't show up in our school, nor is always the willingness for it too, because I think there's even more than just what's going on in the school building, but it's also because sometimes there's great things still going on in that school building. Many times it's just the negative perceptions of the school and of the system that continue to persist. So I think it is really being able to, it is really those conversations across difference and being able to really highlight what the issues really are. And that's hard. So I know I'm not going to be able to answer that question, but it's just really hard. But I think it's definitely something that we can start to explore.
Yeah, I definitely don't expect an answer, but as we start implementing this work, it's very important. You know, I'll use many of the Ward 6 schools. You have a overwhelmingly white early ed program. As soon as those families reach first, second grade, the school demographics change considerably. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of coded language that goes on that we need to confront and we need to have real serious conversations about. And you're absolutely right, that needs to expand beyond the classroom and the school community to the broader community. There's a lot of work that we have neglected to do in this area over the past decade plus that we need to start looking at.
Yeah, and I would just lastly, like Faith as the parent and Faith as a DC resident, we have to stop thinking of diversity and, you know, stopping segregation as having students who live within their communities go to other places to make other communities feel more diverse. So we have to start investing in areas where those students are. And I think that's a real, it's a lot to commute around the city. And it's a lot to put that burden on families and communities. And so when I look at some of our communities, I specifically think of East of the River. You know, we're so resource rich in some areas, and other areas where we know we really need it, we're not. And so I think it's about having a lot of those really hard conversations about, you know, can we get people to go in the reverse to other great programs that may be in other places in the city. And we always like start at the conversations, and we have kind of an effort, and then we kind of pull back and we're like, oh, let's just try to do what we think might be the easier thing to do. So there are just so many conversations to be had, but I thank you for offering that recommendation, and we'll think about how we can offer something even here, or even think about other conversations that might need to be had in order to move something forward.
I'm just going to ask the same question that I asked to the Ombudsman team. I saw only 3% of the cases you've served have been from Latinx families. They represent about 18% of the families in our system. And so I'm wondering what you are doing to ensure that your services are reaching out to those families, including hiring someone who speaks Spanish in your office.
Yeah, so I can't guarantee a new staff person because I don't do anything about the particular budgeting, but I do believe that to be important, hiring someone who can speak particularly Spanish fluently. But I can say that maybe the fact that you didn't see them necessarily in the RFA numbers, because that is when someone has a complaint, that has had nothing to do with the additional outreach that we've been able to do around offering programming around more preventative measures for families who don't speak English as a first language. So, for example, we are currently working with Bancroft to put on our special education workshop with someone who is a native Spanish speaker for their families. And so we are catering the presentation to them. We have worked over the past couple of years with Collaborative Solutions for Families to host workshops with them, and also have translators or interpreters in real time there in the room. We have translated all of our information, even our go-to guide, and have disseminated that to schools. And so I would like to believe that those efforts have allowed us to be able to support families. We've also worked with service providers who work within those communities and are the trusted entities to also share information. And so a lot of times those people come to us. I know Dan has done a lot of significant outreach to those particular communities, and they do call us sometimes with the parent in the room in order to support them. I think it would be kind of naive on our part to think even if we had someone in our office who spoke Spanish, that we would still be able to reach every single person. I do think that it would go really far, but we would still have to do some of these same initiatives to really get out there to serve people where they are. And so I much rather serve people in a more proactive way than just having them call us when it's a particular problem. And we've also realized that a lot of the service providers who work very specifically, or other community people who work specifically with many families, they also having the resources helps them to be able to support. And so as we continue to, we have made a commitment to translate every single thing in our office into all of the different languages. It is a slow going process to put all of it up because they give it all back to us translated, and then we have to like drop it into everything. But we have committed to doing everything in Spanish up front because that has been the biggest request we've had around resource supports. And so I am really committed to that. But if I do have another FTE, which I would love, so I guess if the mayor or the council is listening, I would love to have that. I do think that it would be necessary because the language line is not adequate. We utilize it. And Dan and I have, and I'm sure Tiffany as well, have had experiences where, as we're holding, and we know some minimal things to say to families in Spanish so that we can get them to hold. Some families do, some families do not, and there's a hang up. But I always feel really encouraged with the outreach stuff that we've been able to do as other groups continue to come to us to ask for support.
I would just say to both of you, I appreciate the work that you're doing to reach out. And I know you don't hold that bar for all of the families that you reach in terms of saying just that outreach is sufficient. And I appreciate you saying the language line is insufficient because we should be acknowledging that does not make access equitable at all. And we do know how race works in our socialized context in this country, and seeing someone who represents and looks like you creates more access and inclusivity. And so it's not just about whether you get another FTE. There's been lots of shifts in staffing in my 4 years on the board, and there hasn't been a single Spanish speaker that's been hired that I understand. And so it would just be great to hear you or someone in your role with authority say, this is a priority, you're right. 3% when then 15 to 18 to 20% of our families, it's 20% in DCPS, our Latinx families, is something we should be prioritizing because we also know they're an underserved population.
And I completely hear everything that you're saying, but I'm also not going to hire the wrong person either, just because they speak Spanish. So I think that it would be.
I'm not
right.
saying that,
and I'm just answering to you.
But we also all know how it works.
No, I do know how it works. And I can tell you that when I actually did the hiring position for both of these positions, I did significant outreach to other people because I wanted resumes that were in that same area. And so I know that you're asking me this question, and it's definitely a priority to you. I also want you to know that it's a priority to me.
Great.
And so until I am able to physically have someone who's an FTE, which I would love to, and I want to make sure that it is also someone who their passion is really aligned in this particular type of work, because it can be very different from what somebody else might be doing. And I'm thinking of a particular candidate who was really phenomenal in the lane of work that she was doing. And when I was talking about what would happen in this work, she was like, I don't think that's for me. And she did speak Spanish fluently. So I do want you to know that I'm committed to that. But I think that in the interim, until that's able to happen, I also want to let you know how that commitment is moving forward in the way that we do outreach, because it's important to us to reach every single family that is in need of assistance and would like to have our assistance because they call us or maybe didn't even know it, but come in contact with the resources that we have.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? I again would like to say thank you very much for all that you do for the city. And do you have the 28th down, November 28th, for the teacher principal forum?
Do I have it down?
On your calendar?
Yes, I do have it on my calendar. I do.
All right. Are you planning to attend?
I hope so. I hope so. I do have it on my calendar. I have to put a plug in for Ravel. He put it on there.
Okay.
When he attended the last working session. I woke up the next morning and there it was.
Okay. Well, because we need people like you who have the knowledge to input. Thank you. And you can reach out to your network. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you. There are no further questions? You can go now.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Before we close tonight, I'd like to offer members of the State Board opportunity to highlight events in their wards, if you'd like. Do you have any events you would like to highlight coming up?
Why don't you talk a little bit about the teacher retention?
I'll do it again. Okay. And do you all have any? Yes, Joe.
I would just encourage families, as we're preparing for the My School DC lottery, to attend open houses. There's a schedule available at dcps.com or the Public Charter Board's website for the public charter open houses, and attend the community day at the DC Armory for the open house for all the schools. But please visit schools.
Thank you. I'd like to close again with reminding everyone that on November the 28th from 6 to 8 p.m. at Walker Jones Education Council campus, we will be holding a teacher principal retention forum. We need parents, students, policymakers, teachers, and principals to come out to have an open discussion of how we can attack this problem. Looking forward to seeing you then. And with no further business before the State Board, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? This meeting is adjourned at 6 o'clock. Oh, I'm still on Kansas City time. It's at 7 o'clock p.m. Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't change my watch. This meeting is adjourned.